graders, welcome to Language Arts for today. As usual, you're going to need your copy of Little Women. You will also potentially need paper or pencil if you have found that writing down answers as we go is helpful for you. So if you need to go get those things, please do so, and then come on back and we'll get started. So as usual, our first step is going to be talking about homework and last homework and setting up for our new homework. So with that in mind, Chapter 5. Number 1, why does Joe visit Lori? Joe visits Lori because he seemed lonely and sick. What virtue is Joe showing to Lori? Remember I reminded you of the places where you could go and find information about virtues? The best fit here would be justice, right? To show kindness to another would be an example of justice. So the virtue that Joe is showing to Lori is justice. 3, what is one quote that shows that Lori might be lonely? A lot of you were selecting quotes from 55, page 55, right? There's this quote, the solitary, hungry look in his eyes went straight to Joe's warm heart. Or he taught the part above where it says that he's watching along, right? I can't help watching it. I haven't got any mother, you know, is another great quote. Or even the conversation that Joe has with Mr. Lawrence saying that he seems kind of lonely, okay? Lots of great quotes in there. Flor, how does Joe embarrass herself in front of Mr. Lawrence? She says she thinks she's talking to Lori, but Joe embarrasses herself in front of Mr. Lawrence by saying he isn't as handsome as her grandfather. What is one quote that shows us about Mr. Lawrence's personality? Again, a lot of great quotes, kind of looking at 58 and 59, a lot of you. One quote that shows us about Mr. Lawrence's personality. I've got a tremendous will, have I? Some of you guys said the gruff voice was gruffer than ever. Others talked about the sly twinkle in his eyes, which lessened her fear a good deal. So all of those are great quotes. 6, why doesn't, too far, Mr. Lawrence like to have Lori play piano? The correct answer is because it reminds Mr. Lawrence of Lori's mother. 7, Mrs. March reminds Meg that children should be children as long as they can. What does Mrs. March mean? I mentioned in the video quite a bit that this is about Meg trying to push Joe to think about romantic things before she's ready. And 8, which of these words correctly uses sentimental? We'd say the man sighed sentimentally as he wrote a love song. For today, we're going to be focusing this chapter quite a bit on Beth. So number 1, how does Mr. Lawrence scare Beth? 2, what does Mr. Lawrence give Beth? 3, why does Meg say, I do believe the world is coming to an end? 4, what is one quote that shows character growth in Beth? So again, we'd say one quote that shows character growth in Beth is. What is another quote that shows character growth in Beth? We'd say another quote that shows character growth in Beth is. And then 6, create a sentence following those vocabulary sentence expectations using that word indolent. So remember, it needs to be at least 6 words long. And it needs to capture or show me that you understand the definition of the word. So looking at our objective, 5th graders, we're trying to identify character growth in Beth. So what does that mean, right? Character growth is talking about how you are a person is kind of becoming a better person or improving themselves in areas in which they struggle. So a good place to start as we're getting going on this chapter is to think about Beth. And in the past chapters, there's been a lot of talking about the things that are especially difficult for her or challenging for her. So what in particular is especially difficult for Beth? Yeah, right? She's very shy, and it's almost like excessively painfully shy to the point where she can't even attend school because it's so hard for her. So as we're thinking about character growth, her growing, improving, this is something to kind of keep in your mind. And then you'll see that chapter 6 is titled Beth Finds the Palace Beautiful. At the very end of the last chapter, we talked about how the Palace Beautiful is sort of like the end point of Pilgrim's Progress, and so this kind of like the happiest place there. So Beth finds it. We're going to see a little bit of what that means for Beth. Okay, so we're going to be reading chapter 6. As always, you want your eyes on it, reading along as I am reading with you, and I'll be stopping and talking as we go, and often talking about answers to questions as we go as well. The big house, that's referring to the Lawrence's house. Theirs is the big house. The big house did prove a palace beautiful, though it took some time for all to get in, and Beth found it very hard to pass the lions. Old Mr. Lawrence was the biggest one, so she's afraid of Mr. Lawrence, right? That's the lion preventing her from going in. But after he called, said something funny or kind to each one of the girls, and talked over old times with their mother, nobody felt much afraid of him, except timid Beth. Timid, that's kind of another shy or bashful synonym. The other line was the fact that they were poor and Laurie rich, for this made them shy of accepting favors which they could not return. But after a while, they found that he considered them the benefactors and could not do enough to show how grateful he was for Mrs. March's motherly welcome, their cheerful society, and the comfort he took in that humble home of theirs. So they soon forgot their pride and interchanged kindnesses without stopping to think which was the greater. All sorts of pleasant things happened about that time, for the new friendship flourished like grass in spring. Everyone liked Laurie, and he privately informed his tutor that the Marches were regularly splendid girls. With the delightful enthusiasm of youth, they took the solitary boy into their midst and made much of him, and he found something very charming in the innocent companionship of these simple hearted girls. Never having known mother or sisters, he was quick to feel the influences they brought about him, and their busy, lively ways made him ashamed of the indolent life he had led. Indolent, meaning like lazy. He was tired of books and found people so interesting now that Mr. Brooke was obliged to make very unsatisfactory reports, for Laurie was always playing truant and running over to the Marches. So it sounds like Laurie's kind of not studying as much as he should be and is instead spending time over at the March house. Never mind, let him take a holiday and make it up afterward, said the old gentleman. The good lady next door says he is studying too hard and needs young society, amusement, and exercise. I suspect she is right, and that I've been coddling the fellow as I'd been his grandmother. Let him do what he likes as long as he is happy. He can't get into mischief in that little nunnery over there, and Mrs. March is doing more for him than we can. What good times they had, to be sure. Such plays and tableaux, such sleigh rides and skating frolics, such pleasant evenings in the old parlor, and now and then such gay little parties at the great house. Meg could walk in the conservatory whenever she liked and revel in bouquets. Jo browsed over the new library voraciously and convulsed the old gentleman with her criticisms. Amy copied pictures and enjoyed beauty to her heart's content, and Laurie played Lord of the Manor in the most delightful style. So they're all kind of talking about the ways in which, well, most of the girls are enjoying going over to the Lawrence house, that there's things there that they love and that they get to enjoy when they visit it. But Beth, right? But Beth, though yearning for the grand piano, could not pluck up courage to go to the mansion of bliss, as Meg called it. She went once with Jo, but the old gentleman, not being aware of her infirmity, so infirmity would be like a sickness usually. In this case, it's talking about a weakness. And so this is what we reflected on at the beginning of the chapter. It's telling us that Mr. Lawrence is not aware of her infirmity, her weakness. So what is that referring to? Yeah, it's thinking about that really shy, bashful way about her. So he's not aware of the fact that she's so painfully shy. So, not being aware of her infirmity, Mr. Lawrence stared at her so hard from under his heavy eyebrows and said, "Hey!" so loud that he frightened her so much her feet chattered on the floor, she told her mother. And she ran away, declaring she would never go there any more, not even for the dear piano. No persuasions or enticements could overcome her fear, till the fact that coming till the fact coming to Mr. Lawrence's ear in some mysterious way, he set about mending matters. Um, so Mr. Lawrence here is scary. He scared her accidentally, right? He was kind of loud and boisterous, and it terrified her. So she ran away and refused to go back. And then Mr. Lawrence gets kind of a word. Somebody tells him like she's scared of you. So now he's kind of trying to get her to be more comfortable with him again. During one of the brief calls that he made, so he's over there visiting, He artfully led the conversation to music and talked away about such great singers whom he had seen, fine organs he had heard, and told such charming anecdotes that Beth found it impossible to stay in her distant corner, but crept nearer and nearer as if fascinated. At the back of his chair, she stopped and stood listening, with her great eyes wide open and her cheeks red with the excitement of this unusual performance. Taking no more notice of her than if she had been a fly, Mr. Lawrence talked on about Laurie's lessons and teachers. So he's trying to make things right with her. So he comes over and sort of casually, right, as if the idea just came to his mind, starts talking about music. So we, the readers, are kind of in on it here, right? Why would he just happen to talk about music? Well, yeah, we know that Beth really loves music, right? Um, and so he's doing it sort of casually, but what's happening as he happens to talk about music? Yeah, Beth's kind of creeping forward and getting interested and kind of getting over her fear because she's so interested in what he has to say. So we're being told by the narrator that he just kind of casually brought it up out of nowhere, but we're supposed to assume that Mr. Lawrence probably is doing this quite on purpose because he's trying to make amends with Beth and get her comfortable with him. So she's creeping forward and he kind of keeps acting like he doesn't know it. Presently, as if the idea had just occurred to him, he said to Mrs. March, "The boy neglects his music now, and I'm glad of it, for he was getting too fond of it. But the piano suffers for want of use. But some of your girls like to run over and practice on it now and then, just to keep it in tune, ma'am." So now again, it's like he had never like, oh, that just came to mind. Maybe one of your girls can come over and play it to keep it in tune. Now, Mr. Lawrence, of course, is assuming that Beth would want to do that, but he's acting like it just kind of came off the top of his head. Beth took a step forward and pressed her hands tightly together to keep from clapping them, for this was an irresistible temptation, and the thought of practicing on that splendid instrument quite took her breath away. Before Mrs. March could reply, Mr. Lawrence went on with an odd little nod and smile. "They needn't see or speak to anyone, but run in at any time. For I'm shut up in my study at the other end of the house. Laurie is out a great deal, and the servants are never near the drawing room after 9 o'clock." So now he adds this extra layer, right? He's saying no one will hear. Whoever this person might be doesn't have to talk to anyone, doesn't have to see anyone. Why would he say that? Hopefully you're thinking about Beth, right? That Beth would be terrified to go over to someone else's house and say, "Hi, I'm here to play your piano. Can I come in?" So he's trying to set it up for her so that she doesn't have to worry about it, right? That she can just like come in without even talking to anyone, make it as ideal for her as possible. Here he rose as if going, and Beth made up her mind to speak, for that last arrangement left nothing to be desired. "Please tell the young ladies what I say, and if they don't care to come, why, never mind." Here a little hand slipped into his, and Beth looked up at him with a face full of gratitude, as she said in her earnest yet timid way, "Oh, sir, they do care very, very much." I'm already kind of thinking a little bit about this objective here behind me. "Are you the musical girl?" he asked without any startling "Hey!" as he looked down at her very kindly. "I'm Beth. I love it dearly, and I'll come if you are quite sure nobody will hear me. And be disturbed," she added, fearing to be rude, and trembling at her own boldness as she spoke. "Not a soul, my dear. The house is empty half the day, so come and drum away as much as you like, and I shall be obliged to you." "How kind you are, sir." Beth blushed like a rose under the friendly look he wore, but she was not frightened now, and gave the big hand a grateful squeeze, because she had no words to thank him for the precious gift he had given her. The old gentleman softly stroked the hair of her forehead, and stooping down, he kissed her, saying, in a tone few people ever heard, "I had a little girl once, with eyes like these. God bless you, my dear. Good day, madam." And away he went in a great hurry. Beth had a rapture with her mother, and then rushed up to impart the glorious news to her family of invalids, as the girls were not at home. how blithely she sang that evening, and how they all laughed at her because she woke Amy in the night by playing the piano on her face in her sleep. I love this part of it. So this would have been a time when it was not uncommon for siblings to share a bed. And so Beth is so excited about this news, right? A beautiful grand piano, which if you've ever seen a grand piano or heard a grand piano, um, they're gorgeous, right? They look beautiful, they sound beautiful. Anyway, she's sleeping, she's dreaming about playing the piano, and so then she kind of woke Amy up because she was pretending to play the piano, but she was doing it on Amy's face. Next day, having seen both the old and young gentlemen out of the house, Beth, after 2 or 3 retreats, fairly got in at the side door and made her way as noiselessly as any mouse to the drawing room where her idol stood, her idol being the piano. Quite by accident, of course. This is again the narrator kind of, we're in on it, right? Quite by accident, of course. Some pretty, easy music lay on the piano, with trembling fingers and frequent stops to listen and look about. Beth at last touched the great instrument, and straightway forgot her fear, herself, and everything else but the unspeakable delight which the music gave her, for it was like the voice of a beloved friend. So we're seeing the narrator saying, quite by accident, there just happened to be music there, but we're supposed to assume, that was probably on purpose. Mr. Lawrence probably left that for her. She stayed till Hannah came to take her home to dinner, but she had no appetite and could only sit and smile upon everyone in a general state of beatitude. After that, the little brown hood slipped through the hedge nearly every day, and the great drawing room was haunted by a tuneful spirit that came and went unseen. She never knew that Mr. Lawrence often opened his study door to hear the old-fashioned airs he liked. She never saw Laurie mount guard in the hall to warn the servants away. She never suspected that the exercise books and new songs which she found in the rack were put there for her especial benefit. And when he talked to her about music at home, she only thought how kind he was to tell things that helped her so much. So she enjoyed herself heartily and found, what isn't always the case, that her granted wish was all she had hoped. Perhaps it was because she was so grateful for this blessing that a greater was given her. At any rate, she deserved both. This is an example of foreshadowing, fifth graders. The narrator is telling us perhaps because she was so grateful for this one, it means that she kind of deserves an even greater one to come. So this is our hint of foreshadowing from our narrator. Mother, I'm going to work Mr. Lawrence a pair of slippers. He is so kind to me. I must thank him, and I don't know any other way. Can I do it? Asked Beth a few weeks after that eventful call of his. So Beth decides that she's going to try and make a pair of slippers for Mr. Lawrence. Yes, dear, it will please him very much and be a nice way of thanking him. The girls will help you about them, and I will pay for the making up, replied Mrs. March, who took peculiar pleasure in granting Beth's requests, because she so seldom asked for anything for herself. After many serious discussions with Meg and Joe, the pattern was chosen, the materials brought, and the slippers begun. A cluster of grave yet cheerful pansies on a deeper purple ground was pronounced very appropriate and pretty, and Beth worked away early and late with occasional lifts over hard parts. She was a nimble little needlewoman, and they were finished before anyone got tired of them. Then she wrote a very short, simple note, and with Laurie's help got them smuggled onto the study table one morning before the old gentleman was up. When this excitement was over, Beth waited to see what would happen. All that day passed, and a part of the next before any acknowledgment arrived, and she was beginning to fear she had offended her crotchety friend. On the afternoon of the second day, she went out to do an errand and give poor Joanna, the invalid doll, her daily exercise. As she came up the street on her return, she saw 4 heads popping in and out of the parlor windows. And the moment they saw her, several hands were waved and several joyful voices screamed, "Here's a letter from the old gentleman. Come quick and read it." "Oh, Beth, he sent you," began Amy, gesticulating with unseemly energy. But she got no further, for Joe quenched her by slamming down the window. Beth hurried on in a flutter of suspense. At the door, her sisters seized and bore her to the parlor in a triumphal procession, all pointing and all saying at once, Look there, look there! Beth did look, and turned pale with delight and surprise, for there stood a little cabinet piano, with a letter lying on the glossy lid, directed like a signboard to Miss Elizabeth March. So a cabinet piano is like kind of like maybe what we'd call an upright piano. Actually, Miss Erbrock, if you think about music class, right? It's sort of a piano that stands. This is going to be an excellent drawing. So kind of like maybe this, right? So for grand pianos, those are the kind that kind of like open up, and this would be like what a cabinet piano looks like. That drawing is suspect. But anyway, so it's a smaller piano that he gives her, but it is a real piano. For me, gasped Beth, holding on to Joe and feeling as if she should tumble down. It was such an overwhelming thing altogether. Yes, all for you, my precious. Isn't it splendid of him? Don't you think he's the dearest old man in the world? Here's the key in the letter. We didn't open it, but we are dying to know what he says, cried Joe, hugging her sister and offering the note. You read it. I can't. I feel so queer. Oh, it's too lovely. And Beth hid her face in Joe's apron, quite upset by her present. In this case, upset would not be like mad, but like agitated or worked up, right? She's excited, but it's causing her to feel kind of like an overwhelming emotion. Joe opened the paper and began to laugh, for the first words she saw were, Miss March. Dear Madam. How nice it sounds. I wish someone would write to me so, said Amy, who thought the old-fashioned address very elegant. I have had many pairs of slippers in my life, but I never had any that suited me so well as yours, continued Joe. Heartsease is my favorite flower, and these will always remind me of the gentle giver. I like to pay my debts, so I know you will allow the old gentleman to send you something which once belonged to the little granddaughter he lost. With hearty thanks and best wishes, I remain your grateful friend and humble servant, James Lawrence. There, Beth, that's an honor to be proud of, I'm sure. Laurie told me how fond Mr. Lawrence used to be of the child who died, and how he kept all her things, little things, carefully. Just think, he's given you her piano. That comes of having big blue eyes and loving music, said Joe, trying to soothe Beth, who trembled and looked more excited than she had ever been before. See the cunning brackets to hold candles, and the nice green silk puckered up with a gold rose in the middle, and the pretty rack and stool all complete, added Meg, opening the instrument and displaying its beauties. Your humble servant, James Lawrence. Only think of his writing that to you. I'll tell the girls, they'll think it's splendid, said Amy, much impressed by the note. Try it, honey. Let's hear the sound of the baby peony, said Hannah, who always took a share in the family joys and sorrows. So Beth tried it, and everyone pronounced it the most remarkable piano ever heard. It had evidently been newly tuned and put in apple pie order. But perfect as it was, I think the real charm of it lay in the happiest of all faces which leaned over it, as Beth lovingly touched the beautiful black and white keys and pressed the bright pedals. You'll have to go and thank him, said Joe, by way of a joke, for the idea of the child's really going never entered her head. So I remind you of our objective here in this character growth. Yes, I mean to. I guess I'll go now before I get frightened thinking about it. And to the utter amazement of the assembled family, Beth walked deliberately down the garden, through the hedge, and in at the Lawrences' door. Well, I wish I may die if it ain't the queerest thing I ever see. The peony has turned her head. She'd never have gone in her right mind, cried Hannah, staring after her, while the girls were rendered quite speechless by the miracle. They would have been still more amazed if they had seen what Beth did afterward. If you will believe me, she went and knocked at the study door before she gave herself time to think, and when the gruff voice called out, "Come in!" right up to Mr. Lawrence, who looked quite taken aback, and held out her hand, saying with only a small quaver in her voice, I came to thank you, sir, for. But she didn't finish, for he looked so friendly that she forgot her speech, and only remembering that he had lost the little girl he loved, she put both arms round his neck and kissed him. If the roof of the house had suddenly flown off, The old gentleman wouldn't have been more astonished. But he liked it. Oh dear, yes, he liked it amazingly, and was so touched and pleased by that confiding little kiss that all his crustiness vanished, and he just set her on his knee and laid his wrinkled cheek against her rosy one, feeling as if he had got his own little granddaughter back again. Beth ceased to fear him from that moment, and sat there talking to him as cosily as if she had known him all her life. For love casts out fear, and gratitude can conquer pride. When she went home, he walked with her to her own gate, shook hands cordially, and touched his hat as he marched back again, looking very stately and erect, like a handsome, soldierly old gentleman as he was. When the girls saw that performance, Jo began to dance a jig by way of expressing her satisfaction. Amy nearly fell out of the window in her surprise, and Meg exclaimed with uplifted hands, "Well, I do believe the world is coming to an end." Okay, so remember what we talked about at the beginning, fifth graders, that Beth in particular has this struggle of hers, right, with shyness and bashfulness and timidity, right? These words that we've seen in the text. And so we're seeing that there are some things that she's kind of been overcoming and showing some character growth. So we're looking for two quotes as a part of our homework that will show ways in which Beth has grown in her character in this chapter. So um, I hope you have a couple ideas already. I definitely have kind of tried to hint at it as we go. But your homework, you're going to complete the attached form, and I'll look forward to seeing your work. Good luck, fifth graders.